I fear, my friend, that I shall render myself tedious by dwelling on these preliminary circumstances, but they were days of comparative happiness, and I think of them with pleasure. My country, my beloved country, who but a native can tell the delight I took in again beholding thy streams, thy mountains, and more than all, thy lovely lake? Yet, as I drew nearer home, grief and fear again overcame me. Night also closed around, and when I could hardly see the dark mountains, I felt still more gloomily. The picture appeared a vast and dim scene of evil, and I foresaw obscurely that I was destined to become the most wretched of human beings. Alas, I prophesied truly, and failed only in one single circumstance, that in all the misery I imagined and dreaded, I did not conceive the 100th part of the anguish I was destined to endure. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Scribble, Scribble, Scribble. I am Chris. I have Jared with me, and we are joined this week, most excitedly by, well, most exciting for us at least, by David Demchuk.
Everyone else is snoring.
I don't know how excited you are, but we're excited.
I am perfectly excited. I'm very happy to be here.
Hello, says Mikey.
Oh, Mikey.
David was once a guest on Mikey's podcast, which you should all go check out. And also, we should say that David brings some specialist knowledge with him today because he's, of course,
Because
he's
a monster.
Because he's a monster, and he writes about monsters. And his very highly praised and regarded book, The Bone Mother, is definitely worth checking out.
Yes.
And look at that cover. I think we
God, I
talked
love
about
that cover so much.
Yeah. Because of course we here are also designing books. Yeah, no, that's a real fun cover. So hello, thank you for joining us.
I am thrilled to be here.
Mikey says it was one of his all-time favorite episodes.
Yes, Mikey got very emotional, which I mean, as so did I. So I'm sure that's why he enjoyed it as much. It was really cool to do.
Yeah, no, it was a really lovely episode actually. So there we go. What are we doing here? We're designing Frankenstein. As presumably most of you watching know, we are in the process of designing an illustrated copy of Frankenstein. Jared is doing all the hard work of drawing some pictures and such, and I am copy and pasting text from the internet and trying to make it look a bit pretty. And we're doing that and chillaxing and talking a bit while this is happening. Jared, are you still Yes. Okay.
Am I still what?
He is free of the meeting.
I am free.
Okay.
Yeah, I had, so for those who weren't backstage, I had a very important meeting that ran up until 5 o'clock my time, which is when we start.
Yeah.
So I was sitting here just kind of waiting for people to shut up.
Meetings. Do they end? No.
Not in academia.
No.
No, indeed. Hey, Oriana.
Oh.
Glad you're enjoying the vibes. We're going to keep it chill here. We've got a cat in the background.
Yeah.
Oh,
He's going to keep it chill.
which cat is this? What is
This
the
is
name?
Basky. This is Baskerville.
Ah,
Named
very
after the font rather than the hounds.
yeah, it was an odd choice.
All of her litter were named after fonts. There was a Dido and a Perpetua, and the runt of the litter was named Wingding.
Oh, well, very nice.
Yes.
Perpetua is such a good name for a cat.
Yeah. I think it was Dido. I think that was the other one.
Yeah.
I'm sure Mikey will correct me if I'm wrong. Jared, we should show off the work that we've done, or you've done so far.
Yes, we've all done it, Jared.
Yeah. Everyone really is in some measure responsible for this. You know, we're all one.
Yes, exactly. We're all working through your fingers.
Yeah. I don't know, collective unconsciousness or something.
Ah, yes, Perpetua is a great name.
It is
I
a
mean,
good
not
name.
just for a cat, but for, any number of possible creatures.
Mikey also points out that we did consider adopting Perpetua as well as Baskerville, as a kind of sisterly bonded pair. But Perpetua did end up being adopted with her other sister, Dido, and I think that's probably worked out for the best.
Whatever happened to Little Wingding?
Unfortunately, so these were all orphan kitties, and Little Wingding did not make it.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I know it's very sad, but a sweet side to that, at least, although it's still a tragic story, is that while Wingding was sick and then passing, some little kitty was just keeping her very comfortable and nursing her and attending to her the whole
Oh,
time,
that's so kind.
which she has also done whenever I've been sick. So,
Oh no.
it's great. It's totally
As
great.
long as it's great.
There was
That's
one
so
time when both of
sweet.
us were sick at the same time, and it was
Oh
just
my
we were
god.
just a big pile on the couch the whole weekend.
Oh well.
Hi, Nadia.
Hi, Nadia.
And Baskerville is the nurturing alpha cat. That is
Yes,
true.
that makes sense.
All right. Do you want to load up the cover image first, Jared?
Oh, where did I put it? Where is it?
This is so much
There it
fun.
is.
Like,
Okay.
There it is.
there
so
we
here's so here's what we're working on. I guess you saw this last week, but here's the cover that we've got so
Yes.
far.
Yes.
Nice
Very
and
nice.
gruesome. If anybody is turning in for the first time. And then what else have we got? We've got a few other images for the interior of the book.
Yeah. So we've got.
That's so gorgeous.
Thank you. And this.
And that is beautiful. That was last week.
Yes, it
Yes,
was.
and that's for the very opening of the book. Obviously, the one before it is for the.
I
awakening
had not
scene.
seen this.
Oh, you had to leave at some point, I think. But
yeah, I did. Oh my.
Yeah, this
is
would have been after you left. Then, yeah, this was
Oh
last week as well.
no. Wow, it's gorgeous.
This is a 2-page after
Yeah.
the novel's over spread.
Yeah. So that's it.
Yeah, that's stunning. Everyone's reacting.
Oh, thanks.
Yes.
I forgot about that.
Yes, that was great. You took the ship and then went.
So, David, what are some of your favorite scenes in Frankenstein as we figure out what we're going to draw, what Jared's going to draw next?
Yeah, easy on the we there.
yeah, exactly. We are going to just dive right in and watch Jared and give him orders.
Command me.
Oh God! I mean, I think probably sort of the whole "Let There Be Life" thing is the most sort of potent scene for me. And I mean, also, just the whole. I mean, one of the things I've always really been fascinated by with Frankenstein as a text, and the queering of Frankenstein, possibly at the time and certainly ever after, is the notion of going out and stealing body parts, supposedly the best parts, and assembling them into a composite creature, a composite human being, and so that whole thing, of like trying to, get the parts and where they're coming from and all of that stuff is, first of all, just, especially for the time, just so incredibly gruesome. And also just such a weird approach, this whole sort of thing of, I'm going to make the perfect person and I'm going to do it by finding all of these various perfect parts. It's not about reanimating one individual. It's about destroying an identity to a certain extent and then reassembling that identity as a kind of a craft piece. And I find that, I find his compulsion, Frankenstein's compulsion towards perfection in this way, of course, vaguely homoerotic and really unsettling. And so I just all that whole sort of, really the whole concept really unsettles me. But and then imbuing it with an electrical charge to bring it to life is also just, there's something extremely cruel about it. And I find it really, all of that stuff just really compelling. Strong imagery, strong language, and a very inventive approach to an intersection between sort of gothic horror and science fiction. Did that make any sense? Am I just raving?
It did, although
I mean, you can be raving and make sense at the same time.
And I might want to start to ask you a bit more to keep unpacking sort of the queerness of Frankenstein and the queerness of horror in general. But the bit so
like, I'm just going to leave my wife and go and assemble this guy in the lab.
That's true. I mean, I think especially in a post-Rocky horror world,
Yeah.
the idea of spending just 7 days, I can make you a man.
Yeah, exactly.
It is a super. I guess I seem to remember the sort of very affectionate feelings towards his best buddy Clerval.
Hmm.
But in terms of creating this ideal, larger than life, wonderful man made of all the best parts of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, and sort of cherishing the idea of it, even if it isn't explicitly sexualized or anything. But there's a lot of care that goes into it until it's created, and then like any one night stand,
Well,
you just want to leave the next day.
it
Sort of like the
seems.
revulsion of recognizing once you assembled what you desire, and then recognizing that it's not acceptable in some way.
Well, this is it.
Um,
I mean, because it's tangible, it will always fall short. And as I recall, isn't it that he looks into the creature's eyes and decides that it's uncanny in some way and objectionable, and then just withdraws his affection?
Yeah, it's basically once the thing wakes up and
Yeah.
it's animated that he's like, actually, all these parts together don't really work.
No, no. Funnily enough,
Yeah, it is. I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature opened. It breathed hard in a convulsive
yes.
motion, and then it's like, and then how can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe?
Yeah, that's abrupt. Everything was beautiful until that moment, and
The doctor goes to typical.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, I mean, she really did find a sort of an interesting crossroads among several, clammy and gruesome sort of notions, and she just, jammed them together. And I'm sure that at the time it was really shocking. Even now, it's unsettling and upsetting to read, but back then it must have just rocked people's worlds.
Yeah, and I mean, let's see, she's writing this not long after the Burke and Hare sensational.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, it's obvious to me she must have known what she was doing when she was writing this stuff. It did have that sort of ripped from the headlines quality at that point, and the thought of grave robbers going in, and taking body parts or bodies for medical purposes, like that was like big news.
Yeah.
And she had found a fictionalized way to make it even worse.
Yeah, like it's one thing, and Mikey told me that my mic was a little quiet, which I thought it was, but hopefully I fixed it a little bit. Let me know. But yeah, what was I going to say? It's one thing to sort of do medical experiments on them and teach, future doctors about it. And it's another thing to to play God, right?
Yeah,
To create
exactly.
life.
You can, if you're taking, I mean, not that it's acceptable, but if you're taking dad's arm so that you can dissect it in front of a bunch of surgical students and show them how the vascular system works, fine, I guess maybe dad's dead. But if you're bringing him back to life in some portion, that's just, it's horrific, and clearly has horrific results.
Although now that we're talking about this, I mean, I feel like this is something I've thought about while reading it before, but the creation of life without those, and I'm saying this sarcastically, I'm just going to say this ahead of time, but the creation of life without those icky women.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's and the creation of perfect life, the implication being
Right.
that sexual congress between man and woman results in imperfect life, and that somehow science can do something that is like 3 steps above that. It's really arrogant. I mean, I actually found it quite funny when you were reading the opening. I thought, oh yeah, Frankenstein, he's making it all about himself.
Yeah. That's also
What he
very
does.
true. Mikey says, I always found compelling this concept of too much vitality as something deeply disconcerting or uncanny, like the
Yep.
creature is too alive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There's too much of everything in this creature, and as a result, tips him over from being human to being a monster. And then, of course, goes on this journey where he experiences both the best and worst of humankind, and I find that really compelling as well.
So, Jared, do you think that we should have a sort of grave robbing scene or body parts in a pile in the lab kind of scene?
Or a sewing together, or
I mean, we have the unveiling, and we do have the sewing on the cover, but
Well, that's true. Do you have a scene where the lightning is being channeled into the creature?
well, so we can't put all the images in that one chapter.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true. There's a lot going on in one particular part of the book.
Yeah.
And it's such a weirdly short part of the book, too. The whole bringing to life thing is just a few pages, really.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly true. And then really, from that point on, the book begins. Like with the identification of the creature and the creature embarking, that's really where everything comes to fruition. So
kind of what I'm thinking, this is sort of a side thing. We were talking about differentiating the different narrators with illustrations that take slightly different approaches.
yes.
And looking at what I've done so far, I like the idea of keeping Victor's narrative this kind of not abstract quite, but it's so zoomed in on one particular thing that there's no glimpse of the whole.
That's really smart.
Because he's not capable of seeing the whole picture at any point.
No, exactly.
And those images are really arresting. They're very powerful. So
yeah. So like something that would work in that level of zooming in.
Yeah.
Some moment.
Well, so the other big moment, I mean, there are many, but another big moment from Victor's perspective is the murder of Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So is there a way of translating that? And I don't remember where that is.
There might be. Let me...
Is it really in the same chapter? It can't be.
No. It's much
No.
Like...
which chapter is that in this edition? Because everybody's giving me chapter results for a different edition.
Yeah, of course.
What's the phrase I'm looking for? As everybody remembers, Elizabeth is Victor's fiancée, who he ignores. And
wasn't she originally the
adopted
sister and then became the cousin in like later editions or
That's
something?
right. That's what it was.
No, she was the cousin first and then was the adopted sister.
That's
so
it.
Either way, it's weird.
What a mess!
I love this book so much. It's so gross.
What a mess!
I mean, it happens, but yes.
Crazy.
Mary Shelley's my favorite.
Oh, yeah.
Gosh, that's not helpful at all. Anyway.
Well, how did he kill her? Did he strangle her?
Yeah, he strangles her.
He sneaks into
strangle.
Do they actually get married? And then he's about to he puts her in the bedroom and says, "Oh, I'll be there in a second." And
yeah,
then
they get married.
Distracted.
And he's like, "Don't worry, honey, I'll patrol the grounds." And while he's outside, the monster just sneaks in and kills her.
Yeah, exactly.
He's the worst.
Yeah, well, also the whole two sides of Frankenstein, the doctor and the monster thing is also really interesting. The sort of the two entities, reflecting, one internal struggle. It's really, there's a lot going on.
Okay.
Chris, it's chapter 22 if you were still looking for it.
Oh.
Well, that's true, but mine edition is I need to count then apparently.
What edition are you using?
It's from romantic-circles.org, which is the 1818 edition, the first edition.
Yes.
It's the proper one, but it's in 3 volumes. Each one gets started all over again, chapter-wise.
Yeah.
So chapter 23, that's 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. It's the last chapter?
Is it?
No. Really?
That doesn't seem right.
It couldn't possibly be. No, it's not.
Oh, maybe they're counting the letters as chapters as well.
Well, that'd be weird.
Anyway, I'll keep looking for it. But is that something? The other, what else? What else? Or the other possibility is figuring out what you want to draw from, how you want to draw something from the monster's point of view. Are we talking about Dracula?
Oh.
No, we're talking
No,
about
we are
Frankenstein
not
still.
talking about Dracula.
The other pillar of Gothic horror.
But hey, they're
Yeah,
related.
exactly. Exactly.
Oh man, this writing is so. Draw Mina Harker, says Mikey.
Nice. Thanks, Mikey.
I only just learned that Dracula has a mustache in the book.
Yes, this is true.
This is as wild a revelation to me as it was when I watched through the original trilogy of Star Wars movies sometime a year ago, let's say. And I realized that Chewbacca has a mustache.
What?
Chewbacca has a mustache on top of all that fur. As does like the main Ewok that you meet. Furry creatures with mustaches on top
This makes
is
no
so
sense
70s.
to me. Like, what is that about? That is so weird. Very strange.
Yeah, it's super strange.
Now you've got me looking for it. Because I have the 1818.
Because 70s. Yep.
And they've changed the way that they do the chapters. Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, there's so she
now
combined a
in
few
part.
chapters.
Yeah.
So all the numbers on everything is off.
Yeah.
All right, she's still alive here.
Yeah, exactly what I did. She's still alive here.
It is right near the end, apparently.
I guess. Maybe.
Next to last chapter, she's still alive.
Really?
Oh yeah, here it is.
It is right at the end?
It is. It is the next to last chapter. So part 3, chapter 6, in the edition I'm looking at.
Okay.
I believe this is definitely getting towards it.
5. Oh, yeah, it is. Chapter 6.
She's still there, anyways. Oh wait, no.
Here we go. The deathly languor and coldness of the limbs told me that what I now held in my arms had ceased to be the Elizabeth whom I had loved and cherished. Well, you didn't really show it very well. The murderous mark of the fiend's grasp was on her neck, and the breath had ceased to issue from her lips.
Whew.
Yeah. So this looks like page 189 in the book that I have.
All right. Well, Jared is off scribbling, so that's good.
That's good. Okay.
Jared has an idea. Hi, Kira.
Well, he's doing Mina Harker, isn't he?
Yeah.
Just going to whip out a quick Mina to settle his nerves.
It's what the people want.
Exactly.
That's right. Chewbacca.
Yeah, that's who we're shipping this week. What was I going to say? David, how many copies of Frankenstein do you have? Any of them illustrated?
I only have the 2. I do still want to have the Bernie Wrightson. I have the Penguin Mary Shelley 1818 text, which has the beautiful Narcissus cover.
Oh yeah, I love that cover.
Yeah, it's
absolutely
gorgeous. And I also have an Everyman's Library edition, which is the later text. It has no illustrations. It's a really beautiful hardcover book. It has, the main reason I got it is that it has introduction by Wendy Lesser, who does quite a great job of summarizing the various themes in the work and also contextualizing them in Mary Shelley's extremely complicated life. So I've always liked it.
Huh.
Yeah. So, and another thing that I have that not a lot of people have is I have a copy of Terry Carr's Year's Finest Fantasy, which has in it a novella that offers a sequel to Frankenstein called Black as the Pit from Pole to Pole, by Stephen Utley and Howard Waldrop. It's very highly regarded, and it's a wonderful novella. And it's what happens when the monster ends up going into the interior of the Earth and encountering multiple worlds within. And it's and there are references to a number of works of literature, some of the fantastic and some otherwise, and including a weird little sort of jaunt through Lovecraft. So it's really neat, and is one of my favorite novellas, actually. So I did so want to get the Folio Library version of Frankenstein that had sort of a replica of Mary Shelley's manuscript. Including her handwritten changes and stuff. Like, it's one of those things where I would never read it. It would just be impossible for me to do anything with. But as an object, it was really fascinating. So, yeah, I was really intrigued by that, but never did get it.
Yeah, cool. I was looking up the continuation that you were talking about, and I ended up on the Wikipedia page for Stephen Utley.
Yes.
Which is all well and good, but I will say that it's always important to, to get a photograph.
Yes.
On Wikipedia, it has to be out of copyright, and there may not be many for a niche author.
No.
And so you end up sometimes with a photograph like this.
Oh my God.
Which is amazing, but also maybe not what he would have chosen, or maybe it is. I don't know.
Possibly not. Oh my God. The hands, the mullet, the shirt, it's all there.
The guy sort of walking by in the background.
Yeah, exactly.
I love this picture.
It's so good. Like this should be an album cover.
Even the palette is so unifying.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's 70s film for you, at the very least.
No,
well, I mean, there's the green of the curtain and the green on the jacket and the red of the chair and the red on the jacket, and there's just enough balance. I really like it.
1973. It looks like 1973. It's encapsulated the year in a photo.
That's great. Can you guess what Jared is drawing yet?
No. It is like Pictionary.
I mean, this is just the sketching in bit, figuring out composition and so forth.
Yes. But no.
I also am a little bit. I thought I knew, and then it wasn't right.
No, I have no idea what he's doing. He'll surprise us by turning it upside down at the end, and it will be. It's Mina Harker.
So I'm going to pop it into full on drawing mode so that we can all just sort of stop looking as pretty and we can just go, whew. Kira says it looks like a hand.
Oh.
Maybe. That's a thumb on the right.
Okay. Yeah, maybe.
Could be. We'll see. Maybe Jared's going to change what he's drawing right now.
I'm just going to keep, anytime somebody's close to the truth, I'm just going to change what I'm doing.
Oh, yeah. Great.
We've all done that. So,
like the creators of Westworld or whatever.
Yeah, oh.
Is it Westworld or Lost or both?
All of them.
Game of Thrones famously did it.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, because as you may know, I, broadly speaking, don't do horror because it's too scary.
That's a property of horror.
And it is. And it's not,
Although, I mean, not all horror is scary, and not everything that's scary is uniformly cataloged as horror. But there is, today, in fact, I was talking with my editor about, I brought it up, about the need for a content warning for my new book.
Oh, yes.
Because, I am generally of the opinion that if you are going into a horror novel, you pretty much have to prepare yourself for any number of possibilities. But at the same time, I know that particularly with my first book, I got a readership that was not accustomed to horror and really would have benefited from knowing what exactly they were getting into. I wouldn't exactly, list page numbers and kinds of, graphic things that occurred on them. But at least if you give people a general idea, they'll know whether or not they can handle it. But yeah, I mean, there's no question. I'm reading a really great horror novel now called Naomi's Room. It's a British classic. It's a ghost story. It's 20 years old. It is really creepy. It is extremely effective. And it is not shy about shocking you with surprising details and getting under your skin. It's really neat. It's a really well done book. But I mean, I couldn't recommend it to everybody.
I mean, nothing should be recommended to everybody. Maybe Oxygen. That's about it. Exactly. But it's interesting. Ever since starting podcasting, I'm surrounded by a lot of people who take horror, who enjoy horror quite a lot and who take it seriously in various ways.
Yes.
And and that means getting a bit more familiar with how people think about it and what people like about it. Yep. And what some of the touchstones are, and seeing a few things which, nobody's been mean or anything. Like everything that has been shown to me, like movies, etc., has either been, yes, I guess it's horror, but it's not like scary horror, like the original Godzilla, for example. It's not, or the original Frankenstein, for that matter. They're not scary.
Some of these things were very frightening in their time, and have aged out because either we're very familiar with the filmmaking techniques and the storytelling techniques involved, and we've superseded them in a variety of ways, or now they just have an aura of quaintness about them, and that tends to happen on a sort of a generational basis. We're not usually as frightened by stuff right now from the 70s, some of which is incredible and was very effective at the time, as we were when it was first released. Now I think young people who watch The Exorcist get that it's profane, but they don't really understand why it was such a huge, upsetting, vomit-inducing sensation when it came out. And now some of the stuff that was considered to be horrifying years ago seems kind of laughable. But that's also our way of dealing with stuff that we find unsettling or unnerving, is to sort of immediately insert the this is just hilarious kind of reaction between ourselves and the material. I actually a few weeks ago watched, not in this format, I watched The Curse of Frankenstein.
Oh yes.
Which of course ups the queerness quotient considerably, with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. And Christopher Lee's monster is very different from the Boris Karloff monster. And I found, even though the film is old, I found a lot of the stuff around the monster's creation and the monster's appearance to be genuinely disgusting and upsetting. And I was surprised that it had that impact even now, because there was just nothing distancing you from the fact that this was an animated corpse. And it was quite awful on a lot of levels to watch. And of course the monster was also pitiable, quite different again from the monster in the book, but still just a pathetic creature. And everything around his resurrection or his creation appears, is just incredibly painful and cruel. And that, more than anything, is what I found upsetting and frightening in the story.
Mikey made a really good comment that is very much on my wavelength as well. I like art that makes me unsettled, but I don't like being scared.
Yeah, I mean, I of course, I love horror. I have my own limits and my own boundaries about what I will endure. Sometimes I push them and sometimes I don't. But I guess I like the feeling both of being scared, but also being in control of that and being able to come out the other side of it. And so, there's a catharsis or a release or a relief from the tension, the discomfort, the unsettling aspects of it. And and I'm not someone who really enjoys gore for its own sake, although I've seen many, 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 many gory movies. Like, particularly when I was much younger, when I was in my 20s and 30s, there was a lot of material released that explored the possibilities of gore, and I was fascinated by it because of, more than anything, because of the technical skills that were involved in order to try to create something that looked realistic. But that stuff in and of itself never actually really frightened me. It really is where the vividness of what's going on and the anxiety for the characters in the situation come together. That's what creates the feeling of fear in me when I'm reading a book or watching a movie. And I mean, much like a roller coaster, you don't want to spend a lot of time feeling this, and you want to have a variation of feeling throughout a piece. You don't just want to be barraged, or you'll just check out. But it's that push and pull all the way through that I think keeps me coming back to horror. And sometimes it's fun to be scared. You know, sometimes.
No, it's not.
Yes.
No, I mean, it is for some people, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever said, "Oh, I'm so glad I was scared. That was great."
Oh, I think there are. I mean, I'm not going to discount your experience, because there's some people who are. I mean, you know, last night I was at a restaurant at a patio, and and it's getting cooler, and so we were sitting outside, and there was this little sort of like construction site type heater next to us, and I had my menu in front of me, and suddenly there was a spider on the menu in front of me, and it was like one of those spiders that was like, a little ball body, and then like those angular legs going ga-ding, ga-ding, ga-ding. And I was like, okay, lovely to see you. I don't need you as a dinner companion. And I just moved it down and put it onto the ground. And I turned to my boyfriend, Chris, who was sitting across from me, and I said, 15 years ago, I would have been screaming. I would have been off the patio. I would have been out in the middle of the street. And now and it's really through exposure and, educating myself and just, forcing myself to see this as just another thing. I've actually been able to sort of get on top of that. There are still things about spiders where I wouldn't want to be exposed to them or want them, in my bed, in my hair, or wherever. But I managed to get on top of that. And one of the things that I think is really useful for people who are attracted to horror is that there is that exposure to anxiety and that ability to be in control of it and get on top of it, and to have the story sort of promise, if not a happy ending, because that's not intrinsic to horror anymore, at least the possibility of coming through to some sort of catharsis or release or pausing point. And that, I think, because for a lot of people who are very anxious, they don't get to have that. They're just anxious all the time, and then they come home and they're in a sweat and just are breathing heavily on the couch. So yeah, I mean, there's horror that I can think of that's just grueling. For example, the film Martyrs, the French film, about a cult. You don't really know it's about a cult. It appears to be about a woman who's abducted and a friend of hers who go to seek revenge in this sort of very, pleasant, proper, almost suburban kind of household, and then discover a chamber of horrors underneath. But in fact, the chamber of horrors is attached to a cult that is experimenting with trying to find out what happens in the afterlife by torturing young women and sort of forcing them into it and then pulling them back. And it's a horrific thing. And there are long sections of it that are just incredibly, intensely unpleasant. I bought, after seeing it at the Toronto Film Festival, I bought the DVD. I have never watched that DVD.
Right.
I own it. I can see it from here. I think I touched it to move it from one shelf to another, and I think that's as far as it's ever going to go. But then there are other things. There's a service called Shudder,
Yep.
Which is a streaming horror service. They had a pandemic shot horror movie that came out last month called Host, It is just a blast. And it's about a group of people who hold a seance over Zoom and do many things incorrectly, just really poorly. And as a result, they end up with some sort of supernatural force that is traveling amongst all of them and is wreaking havoc. And of course, it all takes place within a Zoom call. And it is just like, it is like being trapped in a fun house for an hour. It is really a lot of fun. But I mean, you also have to be up for how nasty it is as a horror movie. So, you might want to watch The Devil Wears Prada. I don't know.
We've got some other comments from people who are watching right now, which
Sure.
I bring in. I just want to say, like, I'm not like trying to. I bring up my discomfort / disinterest in horror simply because I find it fascinating to hear other people talk about why they like it. I'm not trying to say
for sure.
somebody shouldn't like it.
For sure.
I just want to
And I'm
lay
not
that on the
really trying
table.
to say somebody should. There are lots of people.
No, exactly. This is a rhetorical move.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are lots of books in the world. There are lots of movies in the world, and that's how it should be. And it would be awful to try to impose something on somebody that they're not comfortable with. I do think it's worth exploring a genre that you have a preconception about.
Yes.
And you think to yourself, oh, all romance looks like this. Romance is a very complex and varied genre, and there is some brilliant work being done in romance that I would encourage anyone who thinks it's all Harlequins to just dive in and see what's available to them. Not only for heterosexual romance, but also now with queer romance, with trans characters, with asexual and aromantic characters. There's a lot of really interesting, complex work being done, and it's all really cool and enjoyable. And similarly, if you think, horror is that trashy paperback that was in the drugstore when in the 80s, that's not all horror is. It can be from very discreet sort of Victorian ghost stories all the way up to stuff that's very contemporary and very literary and relevant to today. There's just a huge bunch of stuff going on. If you want giant cockroaches that eat your face, you can have that too. So it's
and at the very least, if you don't, if there's a genre that you think poorly of like that has a bad reputation and you've just sort of never investigated it, and even just talking with people who are into it or reading secondary literature is a really interesting way to expand your mind about it. I mean, I've done that with romance a bit as well. I haven't read any. I still find it hard to imagine reading romance novels, just to check them out or for the fun of it. But I'd love hearing my friends who are into it talk about it, and friends who write it just go on about it. It's a really interesting form of literature that isn't taken seriously and that's unfortunate.
yes.
I just want to share some things that people have been saying. Nadia said, I prefer horror about things I am not afraid of at all in real life, like ghosts and demons, not home invasions or diseases. That makes perfect sense.
And I have to agree with Nadia. One of the things that I have never been able to watch is the movie The Strangers with Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman, where their home is invaded by this masked trio of people. I just find... I have watched some home invasion movies, and some are worse and better than others, more effective than others. But as a concept, I find it incredibly unsettling. And so for me, it's a line. I can cross the line occasionally, but it's a line. It is much harder for me to deal with real life terrors than it is ghosts, demons, vampires. I mean, some of that stuff is campy and fun, and some of that stuff can be really vicious, but I know it's not real.
I was just thinking about, well, anyway, yes, that is very true. I wanted to let other people's things come on. Mikey says, I get scared before a really heavy lift, but then I can attack it with aggression and conquer it. And the feeling of triumph and relief when it's over is I just proved myself stronger than the scary thing feeling.
Yeah,
but I can't physically overcome a movie.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And there is, for people who like horror, I think a very similar feeling to that lift, where you are pushing through it. I remember seeing Hereditary, and it was absolutely that. Oh yeah, like I just as soon, and it was one of those. I saw it the opening day, and I saw it the opening afternoon, and in a practically empty theater, and I had no, as a result, I had no idea what it was. I had no idea where it was going to go. I had an image of the movie that was not what the movie was, and as the movie started going in the direction it was heading, I really felt like, oh my god, I don't know if I'm going to live. I just was like, how is this going to work? And of course you get out the other end and it's like, oh, thank God. But for a lot of people, I mean, including people who were in that theater, there was one woman, I don't know her story. She was on the other, at the other side of the aisle from me, sort of near the very back of the theater. And when a particularly significant violent moment happened, which I'm not going to spoil, she was so enraged that she got up and she stomped, 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 stomped down to the front, all the way across, and then out the door. It happens about 25 minutes in. So she, of course, got to the box office, discovered that she couldn't get her money back. It's the only explanation. So she came stomping back in, back to her seat, and then the next truly upsetting thing happened where I thought, okay, I'm kind of with her. She got up again and she went stomping out again and just never came back. And I thought, yeah, you know, if you thought you were seeing Home for the Holidays, sorry, lady. Yeah, there were definitely some curveballs.
This is an interesting thing. There were people talking about, I don't, maybe this was because of you, but there were people talking about Twitter, people talking on Twitter about, and again, was this your tweet that led to this, about, what do you call them? Content warnings on novels.
Yes.
And the, and I sort of had that idea that one of the great things about books is that you have so much more control over it. If you think you know where this is going, if it starts going into uncomfortable territory, you can sort of stop and put it down. And also, there are some generic expectations, like you're picking up a horror book, you're expecting a certain set of things. But somebody pointed out that, and this was the thing that I hadn't thought about, was the nature of, if you are enjoying a book and you're a bit of the way into it, and then suddenly there's something that, there's an unexpected sexual abuse or whatever it is that you can't handle, for perfectly fine reasons, whatever, it's all fine. You've just sort of invested several hours into something.
And also very likely money. You've bought this book. You might have bought this book for someone else. You might have bought it for your mother. So, so for me, I mean, I don't want a book spoiled for me, but right. I do think it's fair. And I have a high tolerance for, I mean, as we've discussed, I have a high tolerance for some things and none for others. If you're working in a medium where you're going to have the potential of sexual abuse and sexual violence, or animal abuse, animal violence, animal death, or children, or those, or really like strong, unsettling, graphic things that do have a real life, component to them, I think it's fair. I don't think it's obligatory. People will do what they do, but I think it's fair to say, you know what? This book is like this. Here are some things that are in it. I don't think that you have to necessarily put it on the front page. Today we were talking about whether it could be on the inside back flap of the book. But I do think it's helpful to people to know what it is they're getting into. And they can, at one point I thought, well, is it going to drive readers away? And then I thought, well, only the readers who wouldn't be able to enjoy the book because they knew this stuff was in there. And that's, and sometimes people who don't have a high threshold for these things, when you lay it out, they'll go, okay, well, I'll give it a try anyway.
Right.
I'll be whether
prepared.
Prepared. That, when you turn a page, you should be prepared for the possibility that something like this will happen. I mean, it does if you say that you have animal violence in the book, every time Fluffy comes on, you're going to go, oh my God, poor Fluffy, what's going to happen? But, okay, that's fine. That's still not unfair.
I think the idea of having it sort of on the back flap, or not the back flap, but like inside the back flap on the last page, and then maybe a note at the beginning saying, list of potential content warning or triggers is found there. Like even then, you can hand the book to someone else and have them look at it and say, "Does it mention animal violence? Because that's my thing. If it's got animal violence, I can't handle it."
And
And they can say,
animal violence is
"No,"
a
and that's
huge.
fine. You don't need to know, and you don't need to be spoiled about anything else in the book.
Yeah, I have, I mean, I'm terrible because I have killed quite a number of children and quite a number of animals in my books,
Sure.
and I try really hard to do it only for good reasons, but it does still happen, and whatever a good reason is. Now that I realize I've said this, it's like, so, but I killed that fowl for a perfectly good reason. So, but for me, like, I know that there are people who are like, they'll happily see somebody decapitated, but if you do something to the cat or something to the dog, they, like anything, they just go wild. You just absolutely, yeah, Fluffy really had it coming. You just really, lose somebody in that moment, and then you never get them back. So you might as well let people know that this is a possibility for them in the book and let them make their own decision. I don't think it's a bad thing. The only reason why there isn't a content warning on American Psycho is because the notoriety of it is such that we all know what the fuck is in it. So, or you could look it up on Wikipedia. There's a list of things that are in that book.
It's interesting with the book. Like, I don't know. I read for the first time Beloved not too long ago. And that's a hard one, and you might not know that's coming, right? It's because it's classic work of literature, blah blah blah. Like if you go into it thinking, "Oh, Toni Morrison just died, I'm going to read her most famous book, see what the big deal is."
Yeah,
then you pick that up, and then like, oh.
Toni Morrison, noted historical novelist like Taylor Caldwell. I mean, you know that it's about the horrors of slavery before you even start. But that said, it's true. You cannot know how incredibly graphic and how incredibly tangible and intense some of the scenes in that book are. It really, really is upsetting. And it, people don't talk about it this way very much, but it is one of the great horror novels of the 20th century.
Yeah, no.
And so, and not in... And in an interesting way, because there's not really a lot of actual suspense. There's dread, but there's not really that feeling, because the characters can't escape the situation that they're in. So right away, by the way, this is turning into an exceptionally gruesome image. I love it.
It always sneaks up on you in these streams.
Yeah, it does. I would never have guessed this is where we were going, and here we are. But yeah, I mean, if you're talking about real, I mean, similarly, I wouldn't say that Sophie's Choice is a horror novel, but there are horrors within that are incredibly intense and unsettling for people to read, and you really have to gear yourself up for it. So, people should know, and should have a way of finding out what it is that they're getting into, this stuff.
Yeah, I think Jared, you might remember better than I do, but I think when my literary podcast, when we did the episode on Beloved, I think I brought up the question of, is this a horror novel? And I think
so, yeah.
I think we talked about it for a little bit, because I think that had been, we'd done Frankenstein already. We've been talking a little bit about that. And of course, this has been on my mind. Like, what is that and what does that mean?
Yeah.
It seems to me absolutely it's a horror novel from my outsider perspective. And also from my perspective of, it's a horror novel. That doesn't mean it isn't like one of the greatest American 20th century novels.
Well, I mean, you're illustrating one of the greatest novels that has ever been written, and there is nothing that precludes horror from being tremendous work of art or tremendous work of literature. That's because horror is part of the human experience as much as anything else is.
It's a very intense part of human experience, right? And so, of course, it's going to. It may even have an easier time of being considered great because of the intensity it's striving for.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I find interesting as well when we come to categorizing things that are horror or not is there is a trend towards trying to separate thrillers out from horror, so that horror is about primarily unnatural or supernatural or paranormal or unexplained experiences, and thrillers are like Silence of the Lambs, even though I would consider Silence of the Lambs to be both a horror novel and a horror movie. Not everyone shares that perspective, and so it's always interesting seeing that come up. But Beloved Beloved has a violent supernatural force at the heart of it,
Yeah.
and it's obvious from the beginning what it is. It's obvious from the beginning what's going on to everybody except the characters in the book, and that makes it a really profoundly tragic and frustrating story, and that, I think, puts it like super squarely in the horror genre.
Yeah. In the episode of that podcast that I'm in the middle of editing and hopefully will come out tomorrow or the next day, one of the we were talking about Samuel Delaney's Times Square Red, Times Square Blue,
Yes.
which is a fabulous book.
It
It's
is.
really interesting revisiting it after 20 years.
It is one of the influences on the book that I've just finished.
Ooh, very interesting. Wow.
Samuel Delaney and I actually go back many years.
Good.
The book. Have you read The Madman?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's dedicated to me.
What?
So
Hold on. I've got it right over here. Hold on one second.
This is one of those things that I bring up at parties, certain parties.
Let's verify this claim.
Now, hold on. We're gonna switch over to my cam right now, and I've got my copy of The Madman here.
Go right
And
ahead.
let's just flip it open and confirm. Oh, to David Demchuk, and once again for Sam and Leonard. There you go.
Have a
Dang.
cabin. Wrote the book in, and so.
That's fantastic. I never would have. Okay, well, one of the things I was going to say is that one of the things that I bring up in that as a sidebar in that episode when talking, when sort of going over Delaney's life story and so forth, is the different genres that he's written in, and specifically that he's written some really fabulous porn, including The Madman. But also I shout out Through the Valley of the Nest of Spiders, which I think is just a phenomenal book that is like, The Madman is porny, but it's not as much porn as Through the Valley of the Nest of Spiders is, which is absolutely gay porn, but brilliant and doing all sorts of interesting work and engaging with Spinoza's ethics as an intertext in weird ways. And like, it's amazing.
To juxtapose the erotic and the unsettling, intense, distressing erotic with the philosophical and with intellectual pursuits within the work, and I find that really fascinating. He's written porn, I think, since the 70s, on and off.
Yeah.
As well as his science fiction work and other work that I would say is kind of unclassifiable. But yeah, just tremendous work. I find it funny that even though his porn work, for example, is not as widely regarded as his other work, it is still possible, I think, heterosexually, for erotic work to get a higher level of recognition than romance, for example. I think it's possible to get westerns that have a higher level of recognition than romance. Romance, I think, is really the genre that struggles the most to be taken seriously and doesn't necessarily even try. But the people who are writing in that field are doing as fine a work as I've seen in any other field, and they just don't get the same recognition because the genre is just a wall for a lot of people.
Yeah. This is true. And sort of, I wonder how romance and fan fiction compare these days in terms of that metric, because that's sort of, meeting a lot of fan fiction writers and so forth and learning more to take it more seriously, I guess, was super informative. And is also sort of how I met people who were who knew their romance and would talk about it and wrote it. I, a few years ago, sort of went on a project, which I didn't get very far in, where I was going to read the most abject literature that I could think of, which is to say business books.
Yeah, good luck with that. Oh my God.
It's fun because there are books out there. Like, there's an old saying that, like, a good business book basically has 2 really good sentences in it, and you don't need any of the rest about, my pal Sam owns a farm, and this farm is all, like, it's all nonsense made up stories about hypothetical people. And there's like one kernel of actually usable advice in each book if you're lucky. And so there are books that are out there and like, here are the 100 best books and here is the kernel from each of them. And it's kind of the same idea.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a better version of it.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with, I mean, there are people, of course, forget that there are nonfiction genres, and that some of them are there to genuinely inform you. Some of them are there to reinforce beliefs and concepts you already have in mind, or you would never have picked up the book in the first place. And some of them are there to provide a certain level of comfort, and some of them are there to really sort of, unsettle you, disturb you. True crime is, a really interesting genre because it interfaces very closely with both horror and thriller, but has the extra edge of being, insofar as it's possible to be, 100% accurate in the situation, supposedly, an accurate representation of a true story. When I was a kid growing up, the big book was Helter Skelter. And right. Helter Skelter with fucking photographs was terrifying. And, and I was, 12? And this is a thing that had happened, when I was, how old was I? I was probably 8. And it was, it was just mind bending. And it was, I can't say that it was beautifully written, but it certainly got all of the facts across. And similarly with In Cold Blood, which is a piece of literature by Truman Capote. Now we can say that he took a lot of literary license, which is something you have to be watchful of. But as a true crime story, incredibly compelling, incredibly unsettling, and a real snapshot of a moment in time that just no longer exists. So yeah, also and a brilliant showcase for his writing. So yeah, it's interesting seeing how the various genres are regarded when they tackle difficult material. Oh my God. Mikey, there are things you perhaps shouldn't reveal about yourself.
Wait, what's that first one? The prophecy one. What is that?
Oh God, it was a new agey sort of thing. I can't even remember what it was trying to put forward, but I remember that it was a publishing phenomenon.
It was 93.
Yeah.
And it was just it's a novel, so to speak. But it's basically an excuse to explain new age stuff. I think it's trying to be a sort of Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance thing.
There were a ton of these. Yeah. And they all, the 5, what is it?
It was
5
the secret but 90s, says Mikey.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there was a lot of that stuff. And it is, as a writer, it is helpful to sort of look at what's going on in the world and look at what's going on as far as the concepts in publishing are concerned, just to go, what's happening out there? But, not that I ever would read Jordan Peterson's book, but Jordan Peterson is an example of exactly this kind of writing,
Yeah.
And this is a genre that is not going to go away anytime soon.
About oops, that's not what I said. About business books. Nadia said books.
Exactly correct.
Yeah. Those huge true crime and romance readers, says Kira.
So that's a really great combination.
Yeah. I mean, those are both genres that are marked as for women, in which is always a strange and interesting thing.
Well, I mean, truly, so is horror. In fact, so are most genres. The readership for printed books, I'm not really sure if it's true for ebooks. It probably is really women from, say, 40 to 60. Many of whom are educated, many of whom have leisure time, many of whom were taught to be voracious readers from when they were young. So, people often have this image of a horror reader as like, oh, it's going to be this 25-year-old guy who lives in his basement. And that is absolutely not true.
Yeah.
the same is true. Women are reading fantasy and science fiction. Women are reading certain westerns. My mother read westerns, which I find really funny. I think war novels and spy novels are probably the only ones that have traditionally had a core male readership, and the rest, it's wide open.
There's something I want to say about, or follow up with that on, but first I want to say Mikey said that Jane
Oh,
Eyre is a romance novel, and lots of canonical great literature is genre literature, and of course the novel itself was coded female, or marked as female for quite a long time, if it isn't still, except for this sort of modernist high literature, manly nature swaggering through, which, sure, you can do that if you want. So I'm curious because I guess I also sort of grew up with the conception of horror as maybe not horror novels so much. I don't think I had any conception of horror novels as a kid except lurid covers, I guess.
Yeah.
But horror movies in particular as being a site of a kind of performed maleness that made me anxious, right? Like the thing that the scary movies that young guys, whatever, however old they were, and they may not have actually existed. This all might have been in my imagination, but that young guys would watch and like prove that they could watch, and that you were expected to, take this scary experience and man your way through it. Let's say.
Yeah, that may very well be true, but it's interesting that there is a very, very strong inclination starting really in the 70s and certainly in the 80s towards having female protagonists, or having movies that reveal a female protagonist who as we know is known as the final girl, and she is the avatar. She is the person who survives everything, who manages to overcome whatever attacks, whatever violence is occurring over the course, whether they be natural or supernatural or some combination of the two, in order to reach either an ambiguous or even a triumphant end. And it's a really interesting genre to take young men and force them to look at that kind of scenario through a female character's eyes. And that's one of the things that I also find interesting and enduring about horror. There is a desire to put women front and center, to put marginalized people front and center, not always in a successful survivor fashion.
Right.
In fact, sometimes, decidedly not. But there's a lot of room in horror. There's a lot of room in horror for experimentation. There's a lot of room in horror for marginalized people, because we have the experience of terror. We have the experience of trauma. We understand what it means to take trauma and try through storytelling, either to a therapist, to friends and family, to ourselves at night, to work it through and to try bit by bit to overcome it. And that kind of storytelling has the potential to do a lot of incredibly creative work that you don't necessarily get to see in other genres.
This is sort of where I was hoping the conversation would go, is to this notion of the queerness in particular of horror and how those line up. So those were definitely some interesting points. I'm also thinking about horror, especially horror films, because horror films are, even though I don't watch them, like I can admire the let's put on a show, everybody, kind of ethos of it. Like we have a shoestring budget. We need to be incredibly creative in terms of how we do the special effects, but also how we just write it, cast it, film it, where we do everything. Like so many of these are made with nothing and nothing but pure desire to have it be made, and a lot of creativity in terms of how it's done. And I love that.
Horror is a funny genre in film, in that there is a sweet spot when it comes to the amount of money and effort that you are investing in it. And if you can do a lot underneath that sweet spot and still have a very effective film, there are very, very few huge budget movies that are scary. And a lot of that has to do with risk taking.
Yeah.
A horror movie can by its nature be an offensive, upsetting, off-putting experience. You remember the woman who was at Hereditary with me who went stomping out and back and stomping out. Generally speaking, if you're spending $150 million on a movie, you don't want people having that experience. You don't want people stomping out. So you might give them something that's more of a thrill ride, that's more of a Poltergeist or a Conjuring, but less of something that will genuinely get under their skin, genuinely unsettle them, give them nightmares, make them leave a theater. But if you made a movie for, like, I don't know, $50,000, you can do whatever the fuck you want to people.
Exactly.
In fact, you'll get a reputation for doing it.
Yeah. You don't need you don't need to commit to as many people enjoying it or liking it or whatever. And you what was I going to say? And you also, so there's this both the sense of, like, in terms of what kind of effect you need to have, how wide an audience you need to cast your net for, but also in terms of queer people may not be as able to get the money. And so you might be more attracted to a genre where there is a long tradition of doing things on the cheap. Like a horror movie is something that you can make, so to speak, because generically it is, whereas a superhero movie, maybe not.
No, I mean, the thing is, you can make a horror movie. I mean, first of all, you can make a horror movie over Zoom now. You can make a horror movie in one location. You can make a horror movie with one person. Yeah, Blair Witch Project is a great example. They had very little money. They had very little equipment. They had actors you've never heard of. They had real people from the town that they were shooting in, and they also most of the script was improvised. There was a general outline of where they were going, but most of what was happening to them, even the actors didn't know what was going to occur. And so you can do a lot with very little, and then you get heralded for doing a lot with very little. Whereas the stakes for a superhero movie are incredibly high, and you want it to open as wide as possible, to get as huge an audience as possible. And on one hand, that can lead to a really watered down piece of work, but on the other hand, it can lead to, like, the Spider-Verse movie with Miles Morales, which was, I think, the best film of that year, and just an incredibly intense and incredible experience, and clearly had millions of dollars thrown at it because the level of animation was incredibly high. So it's not to say that art can't exist in this genre or that genre, or that you have to have something that has incredibly ridiculous constraints, financial or otherwise, in order to make something effective. But it's interesting seeing what you can do when you do work within constraints, and you think, okay, I only have this. I only have this much money. I only have this one location. I only have this group of people. What can I do with that? And you think to yourself, oh, a guy with an axe. How many movies have we seen where there's a guy with an axe? You can still do incredibly creative, clever things, and people will recognize that, it could have been like any other movie in the world, but you did it your way, and here's a unique experience.
I'm curious how when you were young.
Let's cast my mind back, shall I?
I'm curious whether horror novels or movies or whatever, how they sort of interacted with your, let's say, coming out process, or your recognizing yourself as queer.
Well, I was born in 1962. So from 1960, we'll say 65, through to say 75, there was, a period I would describe as my childhood and early adolescence. And this was a period where we saw a really interesting resurgence in British horror, in horror on television, in old horror movies and science fiction movies being brought onto television. So a lot of stuff that I probably shouldn't have seen, I got to see in the afternoons at home if I was homesick. One of the things that was probably an intensely queer experience, even before I could articulate my queerness, and an intensely frightening experience, was the TV soap opera Dark Shadows, with Jonathan Frid and Grayson Hall if you've never seen it, there are episodes of it on YouTube, and it had it was it was a way of bringing a really intense magnetic sexuality onto afternoon television in your living room, and and you could get away with it because it was vampires and werewolves. It was and for adults it was probably quite campy to a certain extent, but for me as a child it was riveting, and I got a lot of social and sexual cues from that series. There was a lot of other stuff going on in television throughout that period, but that was one of the continuing shows where I just got a lot out of it. And there was one day where I was homesick from school, and I'll always remember this for the rest of my life. There was a particular subplot that involved, and I find it hard to believe this could even be on television at that time, a head under a bell jar on a table. And it was understood that the head was alive and that the consciousness was manipulating people in the house. And at the end of a particular episode, the episode I watched, the camera started moving in and 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 moving in towards this head, moving in, moving in, moving in, and the eyes opened. And I screamed like I have never screamed, and I ran up the stairs into my bedroom and I slammed the door. I was drama queen, and it was just petrifying. I, of course, have gone back on YouTube and I've seen the scene, and it is, it's not something that I would let a child watch, but now we can look back and we can go, oh yeah, well, of course that was going to happen, and of course it's nothing. But right. But in that moment, as something that I had never seen before, I had never encountered before, it just blew all the circuits out of my tiny little mind. So yeah, there was that. There were also a lot of hunky heroes in horror. There was also Vincent Price, who was, of course, effete and yes. and imperious, clearly a role model, and
but weirdly heterosexual.
Well, yes and no. A lot of the Roger Corman movies have a really strong, perverse, queer.
Oh no! I meant in real life.
No, he was bisexual.
Was he bi?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I knew he had he was married and had kids. When I was looking this up at some point after finding out that he had a daughter recently. I was
no, I don't think he was famously bi, but he was bi, and he really, when he was a younger leading man and did all these sort of like creepy Southern villain type characters and stuff like that, that was a fascinating side of him. But then when he moved into the Roger Corman phase and he started doing these horror movies, he owned that shit. and as a kid, I found that stuff incredibly captivating. Even things like, the House of Usher, the Fall of the House of Usher, where he's like, moping around with silver hair, yearning for his sister. It's, you're sitting there and, and you're like 13 years old and you're thinking, what am I watching? What is going on here? So, and of course, a lot of that stuff leads you to the books. You think, oh, Edgar Allan Poe, I should be reading Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe leads to other writers, other writers lead to other movies and other television shows. And so it becomes this sort of ecosystem that you throw yourself into.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, and you saw, I I guess, was it something that, you shared with other people, or was this a mostly private pleasure?
Well, it's not something I could really talk about at school. And my mother, my dad later on took me to a lot of stuff that I would never been able to see by myself. But my mother, when it came to watching stuff at home, her attitude was, through gritted teeth, that if it was allowed to be on television, then it must be okay. Like everything on television was rated G. And we had and again, like when we were growing up, my mother would let us almost inexplicably, she would let us stay up on Saturday nights to watch various chiller thriller type movie shows, and they were all. I was born and raised in Winnipeg, and they were all in places like Grand Forks and Fargo, and Bismarck, and places like. So they were all small local stations that had like a guy in like ridiculous makeup who would come on and go weirdo theater, and and then they would show these movies that were just shocking. Like I saw Blood and Black Lace when I was 11 years old. I don't know why. I have no idea why. If you were to watch Blood and Black Lace now, you would think, okay, whoever let this child watch this should be shot. Like it was crazy. So we saw, and it was all like, oh, I'm a lingerie model and I'm getting bludgeoned, attractively with a hammer. Like it's like that kind of stuff. And some of it is better than that, but that is in fact what it is. It was all sort of proto slasher stuff, and it was all right there. It was all right there. And then in the afternoons, you could watch, Invaders from Mars, which was another completely terrifying movie for me when I was a kid. So as a kid, I was already a wreck. I was already, the anxiety was up to here. And here were things that made it worse, but they ended. And that was not true of anxiety in the rest of my life, And so this was a way for me to really just sort of, confront a lot of stuff and embrace my anxiety to a certain extent. Yeah, the drawing is becoming just unbelievable.
It's happening again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very, very unsettling. And so how that worked out, with my queerness, there were certain, there was a television series, and before it there were 2 TV movies called The Night Stalker, and it was with Darren McGavin, and I had a huge crush on Darren McGavin when I was a kid. I have no idea why. He was like, 45 in that movie, maybe 50. But there was Night Stalker and The Night Strangler, and The Night Stalker was about a vampire who was stalking Los Angeles and was attacking street sex workers. An interesting thing for a child to be watching. And then the year after, there was The Night Strangler, which was an incredibly captivating story about how there was, I want to say it was Seattle. Maybe it wasn't Seattle, maybe it was New Orleans. But there's a city that's built on top of another city that has sunken. And apparently this is true. And in fact, you can go in the present, you can go on limited tours down to where that early city was. And
Jared, does this sound familiar yet? Because it's Seattle.
It is Seattle. Okay.
Yeah.
And then
the underground. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so there was this killer who was living in the underground and was killing people above by obviously strangling them on a regular cycle. And it turns out that he was doing it in order to stay young. He was or stay alive. Really, he wasn't very young, nor was he very attractive. But he was over 100 years old, and the concept of this, like the concept of the Strangler was like, oh yeah, fine. The concept of him being in an underground city was just stunning to me. And I thought, is this real? Are there places like this? And then to find out it was Seattle was like, again, my little mind blown. And so, but there was a steady stream of TV horror to compete with horror in movie theaters that in order to glue people back to television, because, it was a period where film could be very permissive and television couldn't be. So it had to really play the line in order to keep its audience. And so this was one of the things it did. There was a whole brilliant period of horror in the 1970s on television, and mostly from ABC Movie of the Week, but also a few other franchises. And a lot of that stuff had either actors that I had huge crushes on, or had subliminally queer content that was not very different from, the kind of content you would find in Psycho, or the kind of content you would find in Rosemary's Baby, or, there was all of that kind of stuff at work. And as a kid, it just really connected with me and and for well or for ill, helped develop my own identity as a queer person.
Huh.
Oh yeah.
That's fabulous. I don't know.
Glad you think so.
I
think I'm not personally, but
well,
but yes, in a useful way, as it turns out.
Just to make an entire left turn, I have nothing to add to that. Thank you for sharing all that. It was really great to hear. Mikey sent along a comic strip.
Oh. Yes, that's accurate.
So
another left turn. So every week I find myself having to Google the worst things possible.
Oh no! So you've had to Google like finger marks on someone's neck?
Yeah. So
Oh.
I googled marks of strangulation, and there's some pretty disgusting things happening on this results page. But I did break down laughing because I'm a terrible person apparently. Because one of the images is from a PDF titled "Strangulation." What are we doing about it? As if it's like a public health crisis.
It's like delinquency.
Yeah, like what are we doing about all the strangulation?
Oh my
everyone
God.
talks about strangulation, but nobody does anything about
Well,
it.
you can't cut off people's hands. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work that way.
I mean, was it
Tie
from
their
like
hands together,
like
huh?
how are we treating it? Anyway.
Yeah.
No, I didn't want to read the PDF.
You know, what you need is regulation. People need to be licensed to strangle.
Yes. Yeah.
Just say no. Are you about to indulge in some strangulation?
Ask first and know your limits.
It's like some ad council
Yeah.
PSAs where some like hot teens are like, "You don't do it, Marjorie," or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know where Marjorie came from. That's not a hot teen.
I
Marjorie
think
the
Marjorie
Strangler.
the Strangler would be a really fascinating character.
It's a good drag name.
Yeah, she'd only be in solo shows. No one would work with her.
Oh God. Let's see. How are you doing, Jared? How's it going over there?
It's going gorily, but yeah.
As Mikey pointed out, Jared is now on some more lists.
Yeah. Oh my God. I can't even remember at this point what I've had to Google, but it's been some rough stuff.
Oh, God.
How are you finding doing this kind of scene in grayscale?
I feel like I'm returning to my roots in a weird sort of way.
Oh,
Roots
yeah.
are in grayscale?
Well, sort of. I mean, so there's flashing back to art school. For a very, very long time, I never did anything with a whole lot of color in it because a professor in community college had said something about color being hard to do, and I was like, oh no, then I won't ever do color. So I did a ton of stuff that was like grayscale with maybe one color, and it's like, this is my style.
Okay.
Which obviously has changed a lot over the years, but
yeah, you've done a little color since then.
I can, yeah. So doing something that's just straight up grayscale is like, oh, this is just how it's familiar.
Yeah.
Have you read? This isn't necessarily immediately related, but have you read Chromophobia?
No.
It's a it's a it's like a book of art criticism / theory, but it obviously traces the idea of the nexus between sort of high modernist white grayscale purity and homophobia and the sort of embrace of color. And it's a really fun book.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's very short and readable as well, and colorful. So it's got a bright pink color, as you'd hope.
Yes, well, exactly.
But yeah, I was thinking about that, looking at this, just wondering, is this the sort of thing where wouldn't it be nice to have color to indicate some of these gruesome
I don't
bits?
know. I really like the black and white aspect, and it really makes me think of the period in which the book is set. And you fill in the color, the gruesomeness of it with your imagination, I think.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But as an artist, when you're like, oh, really could emphasize this with the skin tone changing color here or something, bringing
Yeah.
out some of the red or whatever, and then you don't have that and you do it all in black and white. Like, yeah, I could just I don't know. Maybe this scene struck me as particularly colored in a way that my impulse might, were I at all any good at that kind of art, my impulse might be, oh yes, color would be really handy here. But yeah, I Mikey points out that Jared's going to see some strange ads.
Yes, he is.
You know, today Twitter kept popping up this message that was like, "Do you want personalized ads, or do you want to go with ones that aren't relevant?"
I got that as well.
Ignoring it because of shit like this.
Yeah, exactly.
And Nadia points out that she owns Chromophobia, but hasn't read it yet.
Oh, okay.
I'm curious to read it because that doesn't the version of the modernism wars that I learned in school had nothing to do with homophobia, and I don't know if that's because of queer erasure or just because there's so many different interpretations of what happened.
Well, it may not be the modernism words per se, but that's just it compares some of the sort of antiseptic white cube, perfection of white beauty. I mean, it came out a little while ago as well, but versus.
Well, so did everything we were reading. So.
Well, yeah, fair enough. Well, no, it didn't come out that long ago, I suppose, but it's from, I want to say 2000 or so. Maybe it's more recent than that, but not much more. Anywho, I wanted to, while we have you on the line, David, I want to talk about the covers of your book.
Oh, sure.
So I showed the current cover before. I'm going to show the old one as well, I think.
Yeah.
We'll look at that one more for one more second.
I love that.
This is coming out
so
terrific.
Gorgeous.
Does it? I noticed when you were sketching it that you had her initials embroidered onto it. Is that still visible? I don't know where that ended
very,
up.
very top.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's that. Yes. Perfect. I love that little detail. Plenty of details here, but that's real good. Anyway, okay. So this is the original and then the revised with a new publisher version of your book, which the new version came out last year, I want to say.
Yes.
Because I can't tell time anymore.
Well, last year, early this year. I mean, this year is just so screwed up.
Yeah. Exactly.
What happened was the French version came out with this cover. And then I asked if it would be possible for us to license that art to have for the new English version, and I was able to do it. So that was terrific. In fact, not only the cover but also the book design for the interior was essentially transferred over from the French version to the English.
Now, was that France French or Canada French?
Canada French. It was first published in English by Chizine, and then it was licensed to a company called Edition Hashtag in Quebec, and has also since been published in Italy by Zona 42, and then Chizine collapsed for a variety of reasons, and then I self-published this version under the imprint Proving Ground, and acquired the cover and the design.
That's fantastic. Did you have any input on either of these covers?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, the thing is, there are a lot of things people don't understand or haven't really realized about how publishing works. Writers barely have control over their own text. They don't have control of the title, and they don't have control of the cover. So it is ideally a negotiation process. When it was first published, the title of the book was The Thimble Factory, because I had originally written it as a play, or a chunk of it as a play, and the play was called The Thimble Factory. The first section of the book is called The Thimble Factory, and I was very married to the title, The Thimble Factory. And so I submitted it, and one of the first notes I got from the publisher through the editor was, to ask if there were any other possible titles, because they had talked to sales reps and bookstores, and they did not feel that a horror novel called The Thimble Factory was going to sell. And we went through 3 rounds of this where I kept saying, no, it's called The Thimble Factory. And they went, well, you should try to think of literally anything else. And, and then finally, I half capitulated and said, all right, I suppose a possible title is The Bone Mother. Baba Yaga is in the book, but she's really only in one section, clearly, and I don't want to give people the impression the entire book is about her, because they'll be pissed off if they discover that she's only in it for like 15 pages, and so I really like The Thimble Factory. And then I ran into the publishers at a book fair at Word on the Street, actually, and they were like, "Oh, we just got the cover." And I knew that, even if I didn't get to make any decisions about the cover, I at least was contractually able to see it.
Right.
And so I asked, well, when are you going to send it to me? And they're like, Monday. And at the very bitter end of Monday at like 4:30 or something, it appeared in my inbox. And what was hilarious was the email that accompanied it that said, oh, by the way, the title, don't worry about it. Miscommunication. And so I opened it up, and there was the hand, and there was the moon, and there were the words, The Bone Mother. And I looked at it and I thought, you fuckers, you were never going to call it The Thimble Factory. There's no thimble, there's no factory, there's no nothing. Never, ever were you going to call it that. And so I turned to a coworker, because I was opening it at work, and I said to her, what do you think of this? And she said, oh, wow. I would cross the store to see what that was. And I was like, oh. And so I surrendered. And it's good that I surrendered, because I think, in fact, that was true. I think, in fact, The Bone Mother turned out to be the right title. It turned out to be the one that pushed it through for awards and pushed it through for readers. So, but yeah, that was really the level of input I had on the cover. And I love the cover. The covers were done for Cheesine by Eric Moore, who is a wonderful illustrator. And I had always loved his covers for them. And so I felt very privileged to be able to have one. And then for the French edition, the publisher said, The Bone Mother doesn't translate really well as a title. So we would like to do something about The Thimble Factory. And I was like, yes, you go. And so that's how that ended up with L'Usine de Porcelain Gratchen, which is in fact the Gratchelin Porcelain Factory. And they had their own illustrator who they worked with, and book designer. And I always knew that if you were going to call it that you were going to be representing that to some extent on the cover. And so they just sent me the cover, and I just basically was like, oh yes, I love this, because it has that lovely sort of period European quality to it. It looks like a book that you could pick up in a bookstore in France in 1975 or something. Yeah. And I really loved it. And when they switched it over to English, there are certain things that you don't do the same on an English cover, like the title on the spine is reversed, stuff like that. And I said, no, leave it exactly as it is. Just I said, call it The Bone Mother. If you want to, and what they ended up doing, because the title was shorter, is they adjusted the illustration to make it slightly larger in the background. But other than that, they left it exactly as it was. They also were like, in English, you don't normally have the author's name above the title, and I said, fuck that. It's going up there. So, yeah.
I so as you may know, I used to um design books somewhat. I used to help run a parent academic press, and I designed a lot of books for them and did a lot of covers. And the first cover I did, I ended up hyphenating one of the words in the title just because I thought it would make a nice shape, basically.
Sure.
And it was called Ravish the Republic, and it was, so if I put a re hyphen public on the next line, it like both balanced out all the letters and also put the public back in republic, and like it added a few things, and I liked it. And the author was okay with it, but was like, I've never seen a hyphenated word on a title on a cover before.
Right.
And since that comment, I've kept I've seen it several times,
Yes.
but it was something I never had thought about until I tried it and somebody mentioned it to me. And now I'm going to be looking around for, novels where the author's name comes at the top.
Oh yeah, it's interesting because I had not really grappled with these aspects of cover design before, and of course they're never topics in English Canada because you just assume that it's going to be like every other title in the world, well in the English world, and then when you see how things are done in France and in Quebec and in throughout Europe, it's such a different discipline almost. There are different values that are brought to the design, and I find those really attractive. The same was true with the Italian design. The Italian design uses an illustration. One of the things that I should mention about the Bone Mother is that it uses on the inside, it uses photographs, archival photographs from a Romanian photographer around the World War II era. And they chose a photo that was not among the photos from inside the book. They found a whole other one.
Oh.
And when I first looked at it, my immediate thought was like, oh, that's not one of the photos. But then I thought, oh, that's a great image.
Wow, it is. Let me
I mean,
get that up on the screen here in a second.
sure.
But it is real good.
it is. I mean, one of the things that's great about these archival photos is, I mean, it's going to sound ironic and weird for me to say that, but they're in terrible shape.
Right.
The negatives are in decay. There are some that are just completely eaten away, and the resulting prints are incredibly striking. And that's a good example of that. That is all decay on the negative, and the idea behind the archive making them available was to publicize it and to hope to restore and preserve the images that they have, and of which there are hundreds. And so, these images are available for free for anyone who wants to use them. And
Well, why are we wasting our time making Jared draw?
oh, shut up. I mean, the thing is that, when I wrote The Bone Mother, I mean, the pieces I was writing were written for the images. I would find an image that resonated with me, and I would write the piece that would be associated with it. And when it was done as a theater piece, those were projected, and the actors, who looked not at all like any of the people in the projections, were playing those characters. And it was a really cheap and easy way to get a cast of like 25 people out of 5 actors on the stage. And but the images, if you're going to do that, the images have to be captivating, and they're just so incredibly striking. As is this image is just gorgeous. I mean, it's upsetting, but it's just gorgeous.
It's got a nice set of diagonals.
If you like that sort of thing, yes.
I do like a nice diagonal.
Did you ever read that? I think it was E.M. Forster. I think it's an essay where he's talking about he doesn't know anything about art, but somebody told him that a good picture has diagonals in it. So whenever he goes to a museum, he looks at any painting he looks at. He's like, "Is there a diagonal?" Great. And that's okay. It's a good painting, and that's all he knows.
I mean, that's a good start. Every time I go into a museum, I go up to the Mondrians and I just tilt them 5 degrees askew.
Oh no!
Yeah.
This is really great. Are you happy with what you've done so far?
I am.
Is there anything else you think needs doing for it?
I don't. Maybe.
Do you ever sort of reach a point like this and then put it aside and then go back to it later on and enhance it some more or make changes, or do you sort of reach a resting place and go, okay, that's it?
I do both. Sometimes when I'm working on something, I'll get to a point, or usually right around here, and not run out of gas exactly, but go, I don't know what else there is to do, but there must be something, and then put it aside. But other times I'm just like, just tear through it and okay, it's done. I'm going to post it somewhere, and that's it.
Nadia has a good question.
It is a handkerchief.
A
handkerchief over her face.
Jared, can I ask you to remove the green lines?
Yes.
There we go.
That's so nice. How many illustrations are you going to have in the book? I know I asked this last week and everybody just sort of stared at me.
One per guest.
That is a good question. That's a good question. And I wonder what the answer is.
I almost want to say...
Thanks, Mikey.
Roughly 2 per narrator.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
Which this would be the last of Victor's then.
Yeah.
Because we already have one of him, and then we've already got 2 from Walton, so it would just be 2 from the creature.
Yeah.
Is the creature going to see things in a human way?
We don't know yet.
But it'll be drawn in a different style, is the thought.
Whose eyes does the creature have?
They're probably not even human eyes, considering his size.
And they're yellow. Do eyes go yellow after death?
Maybe.
I think, well, maybe the white of the eyes.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely was thinking that it would be...
Or some other sort of slightly abstracted or impressionistic.
Like,
I mean, not that these aren't, but I mean, even more so.
Whatever the figurative version of a Franz Klein is. That's sort of what I've been imagining.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean.
Remember who that is.
Oh, hold on. I'll load him up. Because in case the audience doesn't know exactly who I'm talking about, Franz Klein.
Oh, I've seen these. Okay.
Yeah.
This is sort of what I was imagining. But figurative.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, I'm not in charge of this.
But I do think that it's an interesting thing to sort of like open up the possibilities for the creature and how the creature perceives things.
But, and also it could be super dainty.
Well, that's also true.
Could be absolutely like rococo, little tiny curlicues everywhere. Some, Dürer nonsense going on, but more so, like some French Dürer. Like
Dürer at the court of Marie Antoinette.
Fragonard doing a print.
Oh like God! Did he even do prints? Or
I don't know, maybe. But I'm thinking about. Okay, so again, I have to load things up because
what were the art movements in that period?
Romanticism was the big one.
Yeah.
So in case people don't know who I mean when I say Fragonard, I mean women on swings in frilly bits. This one, this one.
Yeah.
Oops. Well, okay. You can learn more about Fragonard there.
Yeah. But
yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, if there are only 2 more, then we were thinking about a cabin scene. When he's describing that.
Yes.
And then, and I don't know how this spaces things out in terms of the book, but, I mean, is it the other murder scene that we want to do? Like the little boy getting murdered?
Let's really emphasize all the death in this book.
Yeah.
It's what the people are going to pay for.
Yeah.
Or is it his... some part of his demand for his own woman to be created because that's not creepy.
Yeah.
God, that whole has nothing to do with the art, but that whole thing with the bride is something that I almost wish there was more of. In the book.
Yeah. That's what the sequel's for.
Yeah. But it's alarming in its own right that, you know, you would go to the trouble of creating a mate for this creature only to have her be killed, like really within moments of her being alive and being so very obviously unhappy to be alive.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the book, he doesn't even get to that point.
yeah.
He just destroys what he's working on, which I think is really terrifying and gross in its own ambiguity.
He takes her apart.
Yeah, he just disassembles her,
which is horrific.
Yeah, yeah. It is, and there's
a real charmer, this Victor.
Spent on like the history of the family and the cabin and all that. And can we just take some of that word count and send it over to what's going on with the bride? I don't.
Yeah, the bride is, and that's, I think, one of the most startling things about the movie is that you have Elsa Lanchester, who is giving like the most incredibly eccentric performance as Mary Shelley.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, why are we spending all this time with her? What's going on? And then you get to like the climactic moment, and it's over. And it's like, oh, okay, bye.
It's got to justify her salary.
This is what I was thinking about when you were talking about how little Baba Yaga appears
in
the novel. It's like, yeah, just like Bride of Frankenstein, she shows up and it's over.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing that finally persuaded me, one was that a number of people who read the book felt that Baba Yaga was present in a number of the stories, even if I hadn't identified her as such. And I thought, okay, that's good. I totally go with that interpretation. And the other thing is that her piece is exceptionally strong, and so it casts a long shadow across the novel regardless. So in the end, I didn't feel as bad about it, but I did think, yeah, there's someone out there who thought they were buying, you know, because there aren't a lot of them, a Baba Yaga story, and it's like this tiny fragment compared to everything else that goes on in the book. So I haven't heard anyone write to me and be pissed off about it, or haven't seen anything on Goodreads, but who knows, you know, that may be why I got, you know, several 1-star reviews where nobody said anything, you know. You just don't know.
That's gonna happen.
Yeah, it's gonna happen.
That reminds me. So I just read Vanity Fair, and
you finished it?
I finished it.
Wow!
I finished it like a day or two after talking about it on Slack.
Okay.
Yeah, I blazed through it. And you know how on the title page it's like a novel without a hero? That's part of its whole deal. Yeah. There's so many 1-star reviews on Goodreads where it's like, everybody in this novel sucked. They were all terrible people. And it's like, what did you think you were reading? Like, I get it if you don't enjoy the book. I get it. They are terrible people. But to be like, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what... There was nobody to root for. It's like, what's...
There was nobody to root for.
Like, what do you want from this book?
Well, I mean, and this is another thing that comes up from time to time that always drives me insane. I don't know about anybody else in the world, I really don't, but I do not read books so that I can root for somebody. Yeah. And the same is true of like movies and TV shows. I have a perfectly fine time if absolutely everybody on the screen is hateable. I have no problem with, as long as they're entertaining, I am right there. It's like, go ahead, be all horrible to each other. I do not mind at all. And I'm always fascinated with people who are like, oh, well, I didn't really like anybody. Well, tough.
Yeah. I like having characters that I can understand, not necessarily like, not approve of, but if I get where they're coming from.
Yeah, and if their story is compelling, if there's something the other day, a friend was over and we weren't really sure what to watch, and one of the things we watched was Melissa McCarthy in Spy, and of course it's hilarious, and of course she's hilarious, but one of the best things that goes on in it is the scenes with her and Rose Byrne. You couldn't have two more different performances in a movie, and they have just the nastiest, saltiest conversations with each other that are being presented as if they are in some way naturalistic, and I was just like, oh my god, the horrible things that are coming out of their mouths, and I was very impressed, and and it's a big part of what makes it funny, and I find it interesting that there are a lot of people who would probably sit there and go, oh, wow, these characters aren't likable. No, they're not. They're being horrible. They're being horrible to each other. So, yeah.
I am not a huge fan of these sort of like sitcoms where it's funny that everybody is horrible to each other.
Yeah.
But if it's not a comedy, I'm usually okay with it.
It's funny how that is.
Well, I think when it comes to sitcoms where everybody is horrible, there, yes.
Yeah.
It bothers me because it feels cruel on some level that something like Vanity Fair is not.
Yeah,
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Where-
I mean, Vanity Fair's characters are, rich and have full backstories and like explanations for why they are so terrible to each other.
Yeah.
And it all makes sense. And like, there's also a certain level of like love and care that goes into writing those characters.
Yeah.
Like you're rooting for them, even though they're terrible. And even though you don't want them to win, you're still rooting for them, so to speak.
Apparently not everyone's rooting for them, Chris.
I guess not. I like, I don't know. I was like, yeah, Becky, you do that.
Yeah, I just watching her ascend over and over and slide back down over and over is gripping. And it's not because she's a good person.
Nope. Nope. You don't want to be anywhere near her.
No. I didn't know. So spoilers for anybody who hasn't read it. I didn't know that at the end she may or may not be murderous.
Yes.
I got there and I was like, oh my God, this happened in...
There's an illustration in an early edition that makes it more explicit. I believe.
Yeah, she's holding a vial of something.
Yeah, but it's not explicit in the text itself. I thought we talked about that on the podcast.
No, you didn't.
All right. There was a lot to say about
there
that.
Was so much. Yeah,
900-page novel.
And Joss is just like, I'm terrified of her. She's a terrible person. And then the next you hear from him, he died, and she probably killed him.
Is there anybody that you root for in Frankenstein?
That's a hard one. I mean, I never even really liked Elizabeth. You kind of root for the monster, except for the fact that, I mean, maybe they didn't know at the time when it came out, but it's so obviously cast as tragic that there is no great place for it to go. I don't know.
I mean, I agree. Like, they're all kind of terrible. There are definitely moments when you're rooting for the monster, and maybe even a few moments when you're rooting for Victor or Elizabeth, but they're all awful.
Yeah. Well, awful in an awful situation and Victor is the most awful. There is not really a way to see him and what he's doing as heroic. Nothing that he's doing, in the name of science is worth it. And Mary Shelley herself is pretty clearly, of that mindset all the way through. But at the same time, the creature experiences moments of beauty and moments of tenderness, and in that way, I can see, you care. Obviously you don't read the book and not care. But that's not the same thing as identifying with somebody or rooting for them or,
Yeah.
I think it is, for me anyway, it is really easy to identify with the monster and then have to come to terms with the fact that he goes around killing people and doesn't show a whole lot of remorse for a while.
No.
And then demands a bride be made. Yeah.
Well,
we've all been there. We've all.
You know how you go to your dad and you're like, Dad, make me a wife.
Yeah.
Basically. And then you grow a little older. Nadia points out, I'm reading Edmund Wilson's memoirs of Hecate County, and right on the cover it says, this brilliant work of fiction describes the adventures of an egotist among the bedeviled.
Well, that at least gives, there's a content warning.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's basically the same as a novel about a hero, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. We should probably wrap this up. It's been 2 hours. This has been a lot of fun.
Good.
I hope it's been fun for you both as well, and for everybody watching. But thank you again, everybody. If you haven't already and you like yourself a scary book, or even if you don't, because you were bringing this up about people buying books and then putting them down and then being sad about their money. And fair enough, like that's a reasonable position to have. But I am so accustomed to buying books and never reading them.
Oh.
But like I think about buying books as supporting the author, supporting bookstores, supporting the publisher, all that stuff, and that's often more important to me than whether I read the book or not. But so I encourage you to whether you're going to read it or not, to go buy the book for yourself, buy the book for someone else, buy the ebook, go to your local bookstore and get a print copy, whatever you want, or all of those. And yay, this is a great one. Yay, people are happy, and I hope if you're watching this in the future and didn't catch it live, that you enjoyed as well. We will be back next week. Isn't the Thanksgiving week, right? I'm assuming we're going to be skipping Thanksgiving.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Next week is not the Thanksgiving week, so we should be back, perhaps with another guest. Thank you again, David, for joining us.
You're very welcome. It was a treat.
And everybody, thank you. Any other final words, Jared?
No.
Okay. I just didn't want to put up the thing and then have you. I didn't get to say goodbye.
Wait, I had this whole thing.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.